The great hall of the twins was silent that night. Robb Stark, the young wolf, sat at the high table with his mother Catelyn beside him. The banners of House Frey and House Stark hung side by side, fluttering in the draughty air. Lord Walder Frey, old and wrinkled like a dried apple, sat with his many sons and daughters, staring with sharp eyes. Everyone in that hall knew the truth. Robb Stark had broken his promise. He had sworn to marry a Frey daughter, but instead had taken Jane Westerling as his bride. Yet the war was not over, and the Riverlands still burned. Robb needed the Freys if he wanted to stand a chance against the Lannisters. But this night fate turned different. Instead of clinging to his pride, Robb bent his head and said the words that changed everything. "I will wed Roslin Frey," Robb declared, his voice calm and steady. A whisper ran through the hall. Roslin herself sat quiet at the end of the table, a slim girl with soft eyes and trembling hands. She had heard rumors that she would be forced to marry some brute, some stranger. But now here she was, promised to the king in the north. Lord Walder smirked, his yellow teeth showing. "Aye, so the young wolf keeps his word after all." The wedding was held quickly, with songs and laughter filling the twins. The air smelled of roast meat and sweet wine, but under it all lay suspicion. The Freys were never to be trusted, and Catelyn Stark's eyes never left Lord Walder's face. Still, no daggers were drawn, no music turned sour. Instead of betrayal, there was union. When Robb placed the cloak of House Stark over Roslin's shoulders, the hall erupted in cheers. "King in the north! King of the Trident!" the Riverlords shouted. For with the Freys bound to him by blood, Robb not only secured the passage across the Green Fork, but also tied the Riverlands closer to the north. The news spread fast. At Riverrun, the Blackfish smiled for the first time in many moons. The Mallisters, the Brackens, and even the cautious Tully Bannerman bent the knee with firmer loyalty. No one could say Robb was faithless anymore. He had honored his vow. Across the realm, the Lannisters heard too. Tywin Lannister sat in his solar, listening to the reports. His cold eyes narrowed. "So the boy makes peace with the Freys," he muttered. That ruined one of his cleverest plots, for he had counted on the Freys' anger. Now the twins were no longer a trap, but a fortress in Robb's hands. But the North and Riverlands were tired of bleeding. Robb gathered his council, Rose Bolton, Gretchen Umber, and Catelyn Stark among them. His plan was bold. With the Freys holding the crossings, with the Blackfish commanding Riverrun, Robb would not chase south into the lion's den of the Westerlands. Instead, he would defend the Riverlands, bleed the Lannisters dry, and wait for new allies. In Winterfell, word reached the people too. Bran and Rickon, hidden but alive, would one day hear that their brother was not a broken king, but a clever one. The North was proud again. For Roslin Frey, her life changed overnight. She had feared this marriage, but Robb treated her with kindness. He was not a cruel man nor a careless one. He listened when she spoke softly of her fears, and in time she smiled at him. Though young, she carried herself with grace, and the Northmen, who at first grumbled at having a Frey for queen, began to soften. The war was far from over, but the young wolf had gained new teeth. The Riverlands no longer stood divided. The Freys, bound by their daughter's fate, could not betray him so easily. For the first time in many months, Robb Stark's cause looked strong again, and somewhere in the shadows, the Red Wedding never took place. But as every man in Westeros knew, when one path was closed, another opened. The Game of Thrones never stopped, and new dangers stirred in the south, in the east, and even beyond the wall. The days after the wedding at the twins were filled with new promises, oaths, and a strange feeling of hope. For the first time since Ned Stark's execution, the banners of the North and Riverlands waved together with pride. The young wolf had not only mended a broken alliance, but created something larger than anyone thought possible. A union of two great regions, tied by blood. At Riverrun, the lords gathered to speak. The Blackfish, Sir Brynden Tully, looked across the war council and said plainly, the Riverlands were burning. Villages, farms, families, all crushed between lion and wolf. But now, with the Freys joined to us, there is no more doubt. The trident belongs to King Robb. Some lords nodded eagerly. Jason Mallister, tall and stern, said, "With the crossings of the twins secured, we need fear no Lannister host sweeping across the Green Fork. The Freys will guard it as their own honor demands." Others, though, were not so trusting. Lord Vance leaned forward, muttering, "Honor and the Freys seldom walk hand in hand. They bent the knee because of a marriage, not love for our king. Walder Frey serves only himself." Catelyn Stark raised her voice, calm but strong. "Perhaps. But my son is no longer bound to a broken vow. He has restored his name. That alone is worth 100 swords. For men fight harder when they believe their king is just." Robb listened carefully to each voice. He was not the boy who had first marched south. Too much blood had been spilled for that. He looked at his bannermen and finally spoke. "We will not rush to the Westerlands as before. Our strength lies here. The Freys hold the crossings, River Run holds the river, and our men know this land. Let Tywin Lannister come. We will make the trident his grave." It was bold, but it was also wise. No longer would Robb gamble everything on a march far from his home ground. Instead, he would build a fortress of loyalty in the North and Riverlands, forcing the Lannisters to bleed if they wished to advance. In the twins, Roslin Frey adjusted to her new life as queen. She had expected fear and scorn from the Northmen, but what she received surprised her. Lord Great Jonumber, loud and fierce, raised his horn at the feast and roared, "To the Queen, the fairest wolf of them all!" The men laughed and drank, and though some still grumbled about her father, many softened when they saw her gentle manner and her kindness toward Robb. Privately, Roslin spoke often with Catelyn. The Lady of Winterfell had her doubts, but she could not deny the girl's loyalty. Roslin confessed her worries in whispers. "My lord father has always cared only for his pride and power. I do not know if he will betray us still. But I swear, my queen's heart belongs to Robb." Catelyn, hearing the truth in her voice, began to believe. Perhaps this Frey girl was not a trap, but a gift the gods had sent to heal old wounds. Meanwhile, word of the marriage spread across the 7 kingdoms. In King's Landing, whispers filled the Red Keep. Queen Cersei paced furiously. "The wolf gains more allies, while Joffrey plays with crossbows. If we do not break him now, the North and Riverlands will grow into a kingdom that even father cannot crush." But Tywin Lannister was colder in his thoughts. He sat with a map, fingers drumming. The boy has learned. He will not charge blindly again. That makes him dangerous. He dismissed the thought of a red wedding now, for it was no longer possible. With Roslin truly wed and honored, Walder Frey's betrayal would tear down his entire house. Even a man as selfish as the Lord of the Crossing would not dare destroy his own blood tied to a king. So Tywin began to plan differently. He sent riders to Dorne, whispering of alliances. He wrote letters to the Reach, hoping to bind House Tyrell more firmly to the Iron Throne. The war, he knew, would no longer be won by blades alone, but by the game of crowns. In the Riverlands, Robb set his men to rebuilding. Bridges were repaired, villages resettled, and food stores gathered. He ordered patrols along the Red Fork and the Blackwater Rush, cutting off the Lannister scouts. He placed Roose Bolton in command of Harrenhal, though his mother's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Robb believed Bolton's cold cunning could be of use, but Catelyn never trusted him. The Northmen were restless but loyal. Many wanted to march south, to avenge their kin in the Westerlands, but Robb kept them steady with words of patience. Every day Tywin feeds his armies from the small folk of the West. Every day we hold the trident, their gold grows weaker. The lion cannot fight forever without prey. That winter, the camps of the young wolf grew strong. Men trained, lords planned, and for once, the Riverlands felt less like a battlefield and more like a kingdom reborn. Yet storms gathered elsewhere. Beyond the wall, the dead stirred. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen hatched dragons that grew larger with each moon. In the south, the Tyrells whispered in the ears of Lannisters, weighing loyalties with marriage and crowns. Robb Stark did not yet see those threats. His eyes were fixed on the lion, and he believed he could outlast it. But every king in Westeros learned the same hard lesson. Strength could turn to dust if one looked away from the wider game. Still, in that moment, Robb had what no one expected him to hold: unity. The North and the Riverlands stood together, their banners high, their swords sharp. For the first time since the war began, the young wolf was not just surviving, he was building. And the realm began to whisper not only king in the north, but king of the Trident. Winter had settled over the Riverlands, blanketing the war-torn lands in cold mist. Robb Stark rode along the Red Fork with Roslin at his side, inspecting the repairs of villages and bridges. The Northmen followed, swords strapped, shields polished, and eyes alert. It was a different kind of march this time, not a march for revenge, but a march to build and protect. Robb's mind weighed heavily on loyalty. The Freys had been bound by his marriage, but old habits die hard. Some of the river lords still whispered behind closed doors, suspicious of the girl who had tied the houses together. Robb stopped beside Roslin at a small village being rebuilt. "We need more than walls and bridges," he said softly. "We need trust. Without it, no army can stand." Roslin looked up at him, cheeks flushed from the cold. "And do you trust me, my king?" she asked quietly. Robb smiled faintly. "I do, I have to. And the northern Riverlands will learn to as well." Back at the Twins, Lord Walder Frey sat in his hall, hunched and muttering to himself. Some nights he stayed awake, thinking of the marriage that had forced his hand. He had wanted leverage over the young wolf, but now he had none. To betray Robb would be to betray his own blood. The Freys, long notorious for scheming, were suddenly cautious, careful, and surprisingly loyal. For the first time in decades, the old lord felt powerless. Yet Walder was not defeated. Quietly, he sent his sons to scout the lands around the Green Fork, watching for any sign of Lannister movement. He whispered to them, "The boy thinks he holds the Riverlands." But no one controls the game completely. Even tied by blood, the Freys would always play their own hand when opportunity struck. Far to the south, Tywin Lannister was growing impatient. He had expected the Freys to avenge themselves, to strike the north when its king was overextended. Instead, Robb Stark had turned the tables. Tywin's maps and reports now showed a united front of Northmen and Riverlords, their banners marching side by side. It was a problem he had not calculated. Tywin summoned his son Jaime to King's Landing. "The boy Stark learns faster than I gave him credit. We cannot use our usual tricks. No red wedding, no poisoned wine, no betrayal of vows," Tywin said, his voice low but sharp. "We must fight differently. We must starve him, draw him into the west and force the north to bleed. And if that fails, we find another wolf to strike him from within." Meanwhile, in Harrenhal, Roose Bolton watched the movements of both Robb and Tywin. His allegiance was cautious, but his mind was always sharp. "Winter comes," he whispered to his men, "and even wolves must watch for shadows in their own halls." Yet for now, he obeyed the orders of the king he had sworn to serve. Patience was his ally, and he would not act rashly. Back in the Riverlands, Robb convened a council. Lords from every corner of the region came, some reluctantly, others eager to see the north regain strength. The Blackfish spoke first, his voice steady as he traced lines on a map. "Tywin will not make the mistake again of attacking blindly. He will probe, test, and try to divide us. We must hold tight to our alliances. The Freys will guard the crossings. We will fortify River Run and key villages. And the Northmen, well, they will ride where they are needed most." Great John Umber stomped his boots, shouting, "Then let him come! Let the lion feel the teeth of a wolf's bite." The hall erupted in cheers, but Robb raised his hand. "Strength without strategy is death," he warned. "We have learned that. Now we prepare and we wait. When Tywin strikes, we will be ready." The days passed in cautious preparation. Robb and Roslin toured villages, distributing supplies and listening to the people. Slowly, the Riverlands began to heal. Children played in the streets without fear of arrows. Farmers returned to their fields. The people whispered of the young queen's gentle ways, of how she treated them kindly and how she cared for their hardships. Slowly, The old suspicion of the Freys began to fade, replaced by gratitude and loyalty. But not everyone trusted the peace. Some river lords still nursed old grievances, and spies reported unusual movements along the western borders. Robb knew he could not ignore them. He ordered scouts to patrol, ready his men, and even sent riders to Winterfell to update his younger siblings. "We cannot fight only with swords," he told Catelyn privately. "We fight with loyalty, with trust, and with caution. That is how we win now." Roslin stood beside him, eyes firm. "And if treachery comes?" she asked. Robb's jaw tightened. "Then we will meet it as we always have, with steel and wit." As winter deepened, the Stark-Frey alliance became a symbol across Westeros. Rumors spread to the Reach and Dawn, to King's Landing, and even beyond the Narrow Sea. Robb Stark was no longer a boy chasing vengeance. He was a king shaping a kingdom, uniting lands that had long been torn by war. Yet even in this moment of cautious triumph, dangers stirred. Tywin plotted in shadows. Bolton waited in Harrenhal, and whispers of dragons and distant armies reached the ears of Robb's spies. Every decision mattered, every loyalty was tested, and every misstep could cost lives. The young wolf's path was not yet safe, but for the first time, he walked it with power in his hand, and allies he could, at least for now, trust. The North and Riverlands stood together, and the war would never be the same again. And somewhere in the cold winds of the Riverlands, the echoes of a wedding once thought doomed, now promised a future no one had dared imagine. Winter's frost clung to the Riverlands, and the air was thick with both smoke and expectation. Robb Stark stood atop a small hill overlooking a narrow valley where Lannister scouts had been spotted. For the first time in months, the young wolf would test his new alliance in battle, not to chase revenge, but to assert control. "Scout reports say 50 Lannister men passed here last night," said a rider, bowing. "They crossed the Red Fork near Raventree Hall." Robb narrowed his eyes. "Not enough to make war," he said, "but enough to remind us that the lion still prowls." Roslin Frey rode beside him, her cloak catching the wind. "And if they come in greater numbers?" she asked quietly. Robb put a hand on hers. "Then we fight together. The North and Riverlands now stand as one. That strength is more than steel, it is loyalty." The first real test of their unity came when a Lannister patrol tried to cross the Green Fork at night. The Freys, loyal by marriage, ambushed them before they even reached the bridge. Torches flared, arrows sang, and the patrol was captured without a single Stark or Riverland banner lost. News of this small victory spread quickly, boosting morale among the troops. The Freys proved themselves useful, disciplined, and, surprisingly, reliable. At River Run, the Blackfish met Robb with a stern look. "A small victory, yes," he said. "But remember, Tywin watches and waits. He will test every bond we have built," Robb nodded. "We have learned to expect that. We will not rush. We wait, we defend, and we strike only when we hold certainty." Meanwhile, in Harrenhal, Rose Bolton watched the same patrol with sharp interest. He admired the discipline of Robb's men, but also weighed every shadow. Bolton knew how easily loyalty could shift, and he remained patient, observing both the Freys and the northern banners. "Winter is long, and men grow tired," he murmured to his captain. "Even wolves can stumble in their own shadow." Far in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister was furious. The boy Stark had used marriage to bind enemies and now built a fortress of loyalty in the Riverlands. "He thinks he can trap me with a bridge and a girl's hand," Tywin muttered, slamming his fist against the table. "No, we change the game. The North will bleed, and Stark will pay for every slight." Tywin sent letters to the Reach, to the Vale, and even to the Dornish lords, seeking allies and spies, hoping to weaken Robb's position. He could not directly attack the young king. His forces were too scattered, but he could play the game differently. Divide, bribe and manipulate. Back in the Riverlands, Robb called a council to discuss long-term strategy. Lords from the Trident, the Twins, and the North attended. The hall was crowded, banners overlapping, and tension simmered under polite words. "We cannot let Tywin starve us or test our unity with bribes," Robb said. "Every lord must hold their oath. Every village, bridge, and ford must be defended. We have one chance to show that a united North and Riverlands is stronger than any Lannister army." Lord Vance, still skeptical of the Freys, muttered, "And if the girl's father turns? If Walder Frey changes his mind?" Robb's gaze was steady. "Then we deal with it as we always have, with courage and clarity. But Walder Frey is bound now. His daughter is queen. He cannot betray us without destroying his own house." Roslin, standing nearby, added quietly, "And if my father doubts, I will remind him that my loyalty is to my husband and the people who need him. I will not allow betrayal." The council adjourned with a sense of cautious optimism. The Northmen, the River Lords, and even the Freys had begun to understand a simple truth. Strength was not measured in bloodshed alone, but in trust and alliances kept. Not long after, a larger Lannister host moved toward the Trident, testing Robb's defenses. Scouts warned of thousands of men marching from the Westerlands. Robb rode with Rose Bolton and the Blackfish to observe the enemy from the Highlands. He understood that this was the real test, not a patrol, but a fully armed army designed to probe weaknesses. Robb made a bold decision. "We do not fight blindly. We defend villages, control the crossings, and harry their flanks. We do not risk the Northmen's lives on a single reckless charge." The next days were filled with skirmishes, small victories, and careful strategy. River Lords and Northmen fought side by side, surprising the Lannisters, who expected chaos and infighting among Stark's allies. By holding the Green Fork and the bridges, Robb forced Tywin to retreat temporarily, nursing bruised pride but alive with ambition. Tywin to retreat temporarily, nursing bruised pride but alive with ambition. In the quiet after battle, Robb and Roslin rode through a small village, seeing children laughing despite winter's bite. "This is why we fight," Robb said softly. "Not for revenge, not for crowns, but for them. For a land that can heal." Roslin squeezed his hand. "And we will, together." Yet shadows remained. The Boltons lingered, Tywin plotted, and whispers of dragons and distant armies reached Robb's scouts. The young king knew that this war would test him far more than simple swords and shields. Strategy, loyalty, and foresight would matter as much as courage. For now, though, the North and Riverlands stood as one. The wolf had teeth, the lion had pride, and the Game of Thrones continued. And somewhere, deep in Harrenhal, Rose Bolton smiled faintly. Already plotting the next shadowed move in this dangerous dance, winter deepened, and the Northmen and River Lords continued their uneasy march towards stability. The small victories against Lannister patrols had boosted morale, yet Robb Stark knew that the real war was far from over. Tywin Lannister was patient, cunning, and dangerous. Every day Robb delayed. The Lion schemed, gathering allies and testing loyalties in secret. At River Run, the Blackfish called a council to discuss fortifying the Riverlands. "We have held the crossings," he said, pointing at a detailed map. "But Tywin will not be content with small defeats. He will strike where we least expect. We must be ready to defend every village, every road, every bridge." Robb nodded. "We have the Northmen and the Freys united, but strategy is more than numbers. We need intelligence, spies, and loyal hearts. Without those, we can hold no land." Roslin Frey, now more confident in her role as queen, stood beside him. "My family may be cautious, but they are loyal. I will make sure no one acts against you. I will remind them what is at stake, the honor of the Riverlands and their own houses." Catelyn Stark observed quietly, her eyes wary. She still doubted Rose Bolton and the Freys, yet she could see the truth. Robb's marriage had changed the game. "This peace is fragile," she said softly to her son. "One misstep, and everything we've built could crumble." Robb rested a hand on her shoulder. "I know, that is why we are careful, Mother. Careful, but not afraid." In the west, Tywin Lannister raged quietly. The boy, Stark, had learned restraint and cunning, and Tywin's usual strategies had failed. He sent envoys to the Reach, offering wealth and promises to sway their lords. He secretly encouraged unrest in the Riverlands, hoping some Frey sons might act against Robb. Every move was calculated. every whisper designed to test the Stark-Frey alliance, but the marriage of Roslin Frey was proving stronger than he expected. Walder Frey, though still self-interested, could not openly betray his own daughter without risking his house. Even younger Freys, who coveted power, realized that defiance could mean death. Tywin's spies found little to exploit, and the North and Riverlands grew stronger under Robb's careful guidance. One night, as Robb and Roslin rode through the cold mists near a small village, scouts reported unusual movements in the hills. A shadow of betrayal, perhaps. Robb and his commanders rode cautiously, only to find a band of outlaws trying to loot the village. The Freys led the defense, their banners and spears cutting down the attackers with precision. Roslin smiled faintly at her husband. "See, we do not need to fear betrayal when loyalty is earned and hearts are guided." Robb nodded, but his mind was already thinking ahead. Every victory like this strengthens the bonds, but larger threats wait. Tywin will not rest. Back at Harrenhal, Roose Bolton observed the Freys' loyalty with interest. He remained patient, playing both sides silently. "Even the strongest chain can snap if pressed," he whispered to his captain. Yet for now he followed Robb's orders, watching carefully, biding his time. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin escalated his schemes. He wrote to the Tyrells, seeking their military support and promising Casterly Rock's aid to House Florent and Hightower. He knew he could not attack Robb openly, not yet, but if he could weaken the Stark-Frey alliance from within, he could strike later with devastating force. Robb, aware of the constant plotting, began preparing a larger defense. He sent envoys to smaller lords in the Riverlands and even to the Vale, reminding them of the power of unity and honor. He used letters, small gifts, and personal visits to ensure loyalty. Slowly, he created a network of support, making it harder for Tywin to manipulate or divide. In the north, word of Robb's successes and Roslin's influence reached Winterfell. The young lords Bran and Rickon, still hidden from the wider world, heard tales of a king who was not only strong with sword and strategy, but also wise with diplomacy. Arya, now learning the ways of stealth and cunning, felt pride in her brother's cleverness. Even with victories, shadows remained. Roose Bolton's calculating eyes watched from Harrenhal. Tywin's agents whispered in every corner of Westeros, and rumors of dragons and distant armies stirred in the minds of scouts and small folk alike. Robb knew that while he held the Riverlands today, tomorrow would demand even greater skill, courage and patience. One evening, Robb stood outside a village, looking at the burning hearths of homes restored to warmth and life. "This is why we fight," he said quietly to Roslin. "Not for glory, not for revenge, but for people, for a land that can heal, for children who can sleep without fear." Roslin rested her head on his shoulder. "And together we will protect it." The North and Riverlands had taken their first steps toward unity and strength. Small victories, careful alliances, and a bond of marriage had shifted the tide of war. Robb Stark was no longer just a boy avenging his father. He was becoming a king, shaping a kingdom. Yet the Game of Thrones never sleeps. Every king, every lord, and every shadowy hand waited for weakness. Patience, cunning, and loyalty would decide the next moves, and in that frozen winter night, the young wolf and his queen rode together, knowing the war was far from over, but for the first time, they felt hope. Spring came slowly to the Riverlands, melting the frost, but leaving the ground muddy and treacherous. Robb Stark rode along the Red Fork with Roose Bolton and the Blackfish, watching Tywin Lannister's banners in the distance. The Lannister army was larger now, thousands of men ready to test the united North and Riverlands. For Robb, this would be the first true battle where the strength of his alliances would be measured. "The lions are strong," Roose said quietly, "but they move slowly. Their pride may blind them to strategy." The Blackfish nodded. "We have bridges, we have loyal lords, and we have numbers. But Tywin is clever. He will probe and test. We must respond with patience, not recklessness." Robb's mind raced. He knew that every decision mattered. One wrong move could undo months of careful alliance building. He had learned from his past mistakes. He would not overextend. He would not rush to glory. Instead, he planned to hold key crossings, harry Lannister supply lines, and force Tywin into costly attacks. Roslin Frey rode at his side, now confident in her role. She had spent months strengthening her family's loyalty to Robb, reminding her father and brothers that their honor and survival were tied to his crown. "The men trust us," she said softly. "Even the Freys are learning that this union is their shield, not their cage." Robb smiled faintly. "Then we will give them something worth defending." The first clashes came at the Green Fork. Tywin sent a vanguard to test the Stark Frey defenses, but Robb's scouts had anticipated the move. Arrows flew from hidden positions, and Frey and Northmen's shields blocked the initial charge. The Lannisters were pushed back with minimal losses to Robb's army. News of the skirmish spread quickly, bolstering morale among the Riverlords. For the first time, many realized that the boy Stark had grown into a competent commander and a king worth following. At Harrenhal, Roose Bolton watched quietly. His shadowed mind calculated every possible outcome. He had followed Robb's orders loyally for months, but patience remained his weapon. "Even the strongest chain has weak links," he whispered to his captain. Yet for now he waited, seeing how the Freys and Northmen performed. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister seethed. His plan to starve Robb or force internal betrayal had failed. The Freys were loyal, the Riverlords united, and the Northmen disciplined. He would need to strike directly, but every attack promised high casualties. "He may be young," Tywin muttered, "but he is cunning. We must find another way, or risk losing everything to this wolf." Robb spent the next days reinforcing villages, repairing bridges, and ensuring supply lines were secure. The alliance of Northmen and Riverlords held firm. Frey knights patrolled the crossings, Northmen guarded the riverbanks, and Riverrun's walls remained unassailable. Then came the moment Robb had been preparing for, a decisive confrontation with Tywin's main force near the crossing at the Red Fork. Tywin, confident in his numbers, attempted a direct assault. Robb's strategy was simple but effective. Defend the crossings, let the Lannisters overextend, and strike where they were weakest. The battle began at dawn. Mud sucked at boots and hooves, arrows whistled through the air, and steel rang on steel. Northmen and Riverlords fought side by side, the Freys proving their worth as their spears and swords held firm. Tywin's men were surprised by the coordination and discipline of the united forces. Small victories turned into larger ones as Robb's strategy forced the Lannisters back, step by step. Amid the chaos, Roslin moved among the wounded and frightened, offering words of encouragement. Her courage inspired both Northmen and Freys alike. Even Lord Walder Frey, watching from a safe distance, felt pride in his daughter. She had turned a fragile alliance into something tangible, something worth defending with lives. By nightfall, the Lannisters had been pushed back. Tywin realized that a direct assault would cost too many men and withdrew to regroup. Robb did not pursue recklessly. Instead, he fortified positions, tending to the wounded and ensuring the people of the Riverlands remained safe. In the aftermath, Robb called his council together. The Blackfish spoke first. "We have held the line, and the Lannisters have learned caution. But Tywin will not forget this day. He will return, and he will strike harder." Robb nodded. "We are ready. The North and Riverlands stand together. That is strength no lion can easily overcome." Catelyn Stark, watching from the council, allowed herself a rare smile. "Your father would have been proud, Robb. You fight with both sword and mind." Roose Bolton remained silent, calculating his next move, always in the shadows. Yet even he could not deny that Robb had grown into a king capable of commanding loyalty, strategy, and patience. As the sun set over the Riverlands, Robb and Roslin rode together through the villages, seeing the people rebuilding, tending to crops, and smiling despite the scars of war. "This is why we fight," Robb said softly. "Not for crowns or vengeance, but for a land that can live in peace." Roslin rested her hand on his. "And together we will protect it. Always." For the first time in years, hope blossomed in the Riverlands and North alike. The Stark-Frey alliance had been tested in fire and mud, and it had held. The North had teeth, the Riverlands had courage, and the Lannisters had learned that even the cleverest schemes could fail against unity and foresight. But the war was not over. Tywin would return. The Boltons remained shadows in the halls, and whispers of distant armies and dragons haunted the edges of Westeros. Robb knew that to hold his kingdom, he would need not just bravery and strategy, but patience, wisdom, and unwavering loyalty. And so the young wolf rode forward, hand in hand with his queen, ready to meet whatever storms awaited him. The air in the Riverlands had grown tense. Spring had brought warmer weather, but it also brought whispers of war. Tywin Lannister was not defeated. He had withdrawn only to plan, and his patience was as deadly as any blade. Robb Stark knew that sooner or later the lion would strike again, and this time he would test not just the army, but the alliances that held the North and Riverlands together. At Riverrun, Robb convened a council with his closest advisors, the Blackfish, Roose Bolton, Great Janumba, and of course, Catelyn Stark and Roslin Frey. "Tywin will return," Robb said, pointing to a map marked with Lannister movements. "He will try to divide us, to find weakness. Our loyalty, our unity must not waver," the Blackfish nodded. "The Lannisters rely on fear and bribery. They will try to turn one lord against another, and they will test the Freys. If they falter, all of this will crumble." Robb turned to Roslin. "My queen, your family is the key. Can we trust them to stand with us when Tywin strikes?" Roslin met his gaze firmly. "They will. I have reminded my father and brothers what is at stake. The honor of the Riverlands, the life of my husband, and the survival of our houses. I will not let them betray this union." Catelyn's eyes, however, remained cautious. Even with loyalty, shadows linger. Roose Bolton is patient, and some Freys are ambitious. Trust must be earned every day, not assumed. Rose, who'd been standing silently, finally spoke. "Patience is the truest weapon. Let the lion strike first. We watch, we learn, and we act when it suits us. The North and Riverlands are strong, but only if every piece moves correctly." The days that followed were filled with preparation. Robb strengthened the defenses along every crossing, repaired walls, and ensured that villages had supplies. Frey knights patrolled tirelessly, while the Northmen trained relentlessly. The unity of the army was tested every day, and slowly trust grew stronger. Then came the first sign of Tywin's escalation. A Lannister force, larger and better equipped than before, advanced on the Red Fork. Tywin had learned from his previous failures and aimed to strike with overwhelming strength. Robb's scouts reported the movement, and the young king prepared his defenses carefully. Robb rode with Roslin and the Blackfish to the front line, observing the approaching banners. "The lion is clever," he said. "He seeks a way to divide us. We must hold our lines, protect the people, and trust each other." The battle began at dawn. Tywin's forces charged, expecting disarray and rebellion among the Riverlords. Instead, they met a united front. Freys and Northmen fought side by side, disciplined and coordinated. The initial charge was repelled, forcing the Lannisters to retreat temporarily, but Tywin was relentless. He sent envoys secretly to minor Frey lords, whispering promises of power and wealth if they betrayed Robb. For a moment, tension gripped the alliance. Some younger Freys hesitated, tempted by Tywin's words. Roslin confronted them in the Hall of the Twins, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Do you betray your king and your honor for coins and promises? The North and Riverlands fight as one. If you falter, all that we have built will be destroyed. Stand with us or fall alone." Her words cut deep. The Freys looked at one another, then at her, and finally bowed their heads. Loyalty was renewed, and the unity held firm. Even Lord Walder Frey, watching in silence, felt pride for his daughter and recognized that this was a marriage and alliance worth defending. The following days saw more skirmishes. Robb's careful strategy frustrated Tywin. The Northmen struck supply lines, the Freys held crossings, and Riverrun's garrison prevented flanking maneuvers. The Lannisters suffered losses and growing frustration. Robb did not give chase recklessly. He knew that patience and defense were more powerful than reckless attacks. During a quiet night, Robb and Roslin stood outside a village, watching children play near the river. "They are what we fight for," Robb said softly. "A land where they can grow up without fear." Roslin rested her hand on his arm. "And together, we will protect it. We have survived storms, betrayals, and battles. We will survive this too," but danger still lingered. Roose Bolton remained a shadow in Harrenhal, calculating, observing, waiting for the moment when one wrong move could give him power. Tywin, frustrated by failure, began plotting more daring schemes, reaching out to allies across the Seven Kingdoms. Rumors of distant armies and dragons reached the borders, reminding Robb that Westeros was a dangerous place, and peace was always temporary. Still, the Stark-Frey alliance had proven stronger than anyone expected. They had survived both battle and temptation, held together by courage, strategy, and loyalty. For the first time, Robb Stark truly felt the weight and promise of kingship. As the sun rose over the Riverlands, the young wolf rode alongside his queen, banners of wolf and cross united. They had faced betrayal, tested their forces, and overcome Tywin's first major strike. But Robb knew the war was not yet finished. The final confrontation loomed, and he would need every ally, every strategy, and every ounce of courage to secure his kingdom once and for all. The North and Riverlands stood together, stronger than ever, and Robb Stark, hand in hand with Roslin Frey, rode toward the final storm, ready to decide the fate of Westeros. The Riverlands were tense with anticipation. Robb Stark stood atop a ridge overlooking the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. Tywin Lannister's forces had gathered in full, a golden tide of banners stretching for miles. This was the moment every alliance, every plan, and every decision would be tested. The young wolf had spent months uniting the North and Riverlands, and now he would see if that unity could withstand the might of the Westerlands. Beside him, Roslin Frey adjusted her cloak, standing tall despite the cold wind. "Are you ready, my king?" she asked. Robb took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on him. "I am, and so are they. The Northmen, the Riverlords, and the Freys, they fight not just for me, but for their homes and families. That is strength no army can break." The Blackfish rode up, a grim look on his face. "Tywin is clever, but we have learned patience and strategy. We hold our positions, we protect the crossings, and we strike only when they falter. That is how we win." Roose Bolton, watching from a nearby hill, remained silent, calculating every move. Even he had to admit that Robb's leadership had grown formidable. Shadows would always linger, but for now the young wolf commanded loyalty that few could challenge. The battle began at dawn. Tywin's forces charged with thunderous roars, expecting a divided enemy. Instead, they met a united front. Freys held the bridges, Northmen defended the hills, and Riverlords flanked the attackers. Arrows flew like rain, and the clash of steel rang through the valley. Tywin had brought his best generals, but each maneuver was anticipated by Robb's scouts and commanders. Hours passed, with neither side yielding. Tywin's soldiers grew frustrated at the disciplined defense, while Robb's army grew stronger with each successful counterattack. The unity he had forged through marriage and strategy proved decisive. Even the younger Freys fought with fierce determination, inspired by Roslin's courage and the promise of honor. During the battle, a sudden push by Lannister cavalry threatened to break one of the bridges. Robb acted quickly, sending a mix of Northmen and Freys to hold the line. They fought with precision, throwing the cavalry into disarray and turning what could have been disaster into a triumph. Tywin watched from the distance, realizing that brute force alone would not defeat the young wolf. As the sun reached its peak, Robb led a calculated strike against the Lannister center, combining flanking maneuvers with the ferocity of the Northmen. The Golden Lion's army wavered under the unexpected pressure. Tywin, realizing his pride would cost him more men, ordered a retreat, acknowledging, at least temporarily, the strength of the Stark-Frey alliance. When the battlefield grew quiet, Robb rode among his men, greeting the river lords and Freys who had stood firm. The soldiers cheered for their king, shouting his name across the valley. The unity that had seemed fragile months ago had proven unbreakable in the face of Tywin's might. Later, in the hall of Riverrun, the council gathered to celebrate victory, yet Robb remained thoughtful. "This is not the end," he said. "Tywin will return, schemes will continue, and shadows linger in Harrenhal and beyond. But today, we have shown what unity can achieve. The North and Riverlands are no longer separate. They are one, and together we are strong." Roslin, now confident in her role as queen, stood beside him. "Your people, your allies, and even my family see it now. Loyalty and honor can win wars, even against the cleverest of lions." Lord Walder Frey, who had observed quietly, nodded slowly. "My daughter has done well. The wolf is no longer alone, and the Freys have honor restored." Catelyn Stark, proud yet cautious, spoke softly to Robb. "You have grown into a king worthy of loyalty, strategy, and respect. But remember, even this unity must be maintained. Watch for shadows, and never forget the cost of missteps." Rose Bolton, ever silent and calculating, gave a small nod. He would wait, as always, but he could not deny that Robb had proven himself capable of commanding both loyalty and fear, a rare combination. As the sun set over the Riverlands, Robb and Roslin rode together through villages rebuilt and homes restored. Children played, and families tended their fields without fear. "This is why we fight," Robb said quietly. "For a land that can heal and grow." Roslin rested her head on his shoulder. "And together, we will protect it, always." The victory over Tywin Lannister was significant. The North and Riverlands had stood united. The Freys had proven their loyalty, and Robb Stark had grown into the king the people of Westeros needed. Rumors of dragons and distant armies remained, but for now, hope blossomed across the Riverlands and the North. For the first time in years, the young wolf did not merely survive. He thrived. He had secured his alliances, strengthened his kingdom, and protected the people who mattered most. And somewhere, in the shadows of Westeros, even the cleverest lions, the darkest shadows, and the whispers of dragons would remember the name of the king who united North and Riverlands, Robb Stark. The young wolf and his queen Roslin Frey, the unifier of two lands,